I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
Hold on to your seats, because what just happened behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace is the kind of royal bombshell that could rewrite history and leave even the most seasoned palace insiders gasping for air. A shocking development from inside Buckingham Palace has sent shockwaves through royal observers. In a highly confidential closed-door meeting, King Charles made a decision that left everyone present stunned into silence. This was no ceremonial display, no polite bow to tradition. This was raw, unfiltered power in motion. In an unprecedented move, Charles handed the symbolic crown to Catherine, the Princess of Wales. A gesture so loaded with meaning it screamed of an invisible coup. A quiet but undeniable shift toward her and Prince William, instantly sidelining Queen Camilla. But the real shocker? Moments later, the king performed a gesture that shattered protocol and left the room gasping. Camilla, once untouchable, was ordered to bow, forced to acknowledge a rising power she could neither stop nor publicly oppose. The tension? Palpable, suffocating. The whispers that erupted behind those grand palace walls hinted at a rift that might never heal. It was a room charged with centuries of tradition, the air heavy with the weight of history and the ticking of an antique clock that seemed to measure not seconds but mounting anticipation. At the center sat King Charles III, the man who had long been known as a sensitive, sometimes easily influenced monarch, now radiating a quiet ferocity that caught everyone off guard. Facing unsettling health reports in early 2024, the king appeared transformed, resolute, a man willing to confront uncomfortable truths to safeguard the monarchy. To his right sat Catherine, calm yet commanding, the public darling and mother of the future heirs, whose quiet grace had just months earlier won the admiration of a nation when she shared her personal battle with illness. And opposite her, Queen Camilla, the woman whose patient rise from scandalous shadows to the pinnacle of influence had made her seemingly untouchable, now suddenly teetering on a precipice she did not see coming. This was not a meeting to discuss mere administrative matters. It was a battlefield disguised as diplomacy. With slightly trembling hands, King Charles opened a deep blue velvet box. Inside lay a crown gleaming with history, a piece of power that had long been symbolic but now charged with unprecedented political weight. And instead of following protocol and offering it to Camilla, Charles turned toward Catherine. The tension was immediate, a current running down the spines of everyone in the room. The king's gaze was piercing, deliberate. This was more than a gift. This was a message. The future now belonged to Catherine and William, and Camilla's era of quiet dominance was being forcibly eclipsed. As Catherine accepted the crown with reverent composure, radiating calm authority, Camilla's reaction was a study in restrained fury. Hands clenched beneath the table, jaw tight, her poised, queenly facade cracking under the weight of humiliation and disbelief. And then came the gesture that made everyone in that room hold their breath. King Charles bowed before Catherine, a symbolic act so radical it was being whispered about as a historical first. A king bowing to a princess, signaling a recognition of the future queen. But he did not stop there. His eyes, cold and unwavering, turned to Camilla, and with a subtle but decisive motion, he ordered her to show the same respect. Her compliance was reluctant, stiff, her pride visibly battered. In that moment, palace insiders would later describe the scene as an invisible slap to Camilla's authority, a crushing blow to a queen who had long wielded her influence behind the scenes. This was power theater at its most brutal, executed with quiet precision. And the king, Charles, frail yet resolute, sat observing it all, aware that he had opened a chapter whose outcome could define his legacy or plunge the monarchy into turmoil. His health, the inevitable shadow of age, did nothing to diminish the steel in his eyes. He had drawn a line, one that even Camilla could not cross without dire consequences. Her tactics, threats of past secrets, whispers of divorce, hints at media leaks, now seemed ineffectual, like arrows bouncing off an immovable fortress. The balance had shifted. The machinery of the palace, once equally aligned with both, now tilted unmistakably toward William and Catherine, leaving Camilla isolated, calculating, and dangerously quiet. Every step she took in her chambers, every glance cast toward the throne, was a silent reminder that she was far from defeated. This was not surrender, it was strategy, patience, a brewing storm. Inside Buckingham Palace, the quiet aftermath of this meeting was as telling as the confrontation itself. Senior advisors, long accustomed to Camilla's subtle control, now exchanged wary glances, aware that the epicenter of influence had moved. The next moves, the next leaks, the next carefully highly orchestrated gestures all hinted at a high-stakes chess game where each piece was carefully monitored, each action laden with consequences that could echo for decades. And Catherine, now a visible beacon of the monarchy's future, understood the weight she bore. This crown was no mere ornament. It was the embodiment of expectation, the symbol of a monarchy in transition, tested and strained under the pressures of ambition, loyalty, and human emotion. Her every gesture was now watched, analyzed, and, most importantly, respected. The storm outside Buckingham Palace was calm, deceptive, but inside, the halls vibrated with an invisible tremor of tension. Camilla's retreat into her private quarters was not defeat. It was the silent plotting of a queen cornered but far from broken. Every step she took, every rustle of silk against the marble floors, whispered of scheming, of plans quietly forming to reclaim what had been stripped from her. She was a master of the invisible game, a strategist who had spent decades understanding the cracks in the system, and now, even as Catherine basked in public adoration, Camilla's mind raced with possibilities that could unravel this new order. The very walls of Buckingham seemed to hold their breath, knowing the quiet before an eruption that could shock the monarchy to its core. Every shadow became her ally, every servant a potential witness to her silent machinations. Catherine and William, meanwhile, walked a path lined with the cheers of the public, but even in the limelight, their senses remained sharp. Every glance from an aide, every unexpected phone call hinted at subtle movements from Camilla's corner. The power that had once been hers was no longer tangible, yet its echo lingered like a ghost in the corridors of influence. Catherine felt the weight of the crown not just on her head, but on her very shoulders, a tangible reminder that she now stood at the crossroads of history, bearing the monarchy's fragile future. William, beside her, was no longer the quiet observer of decades past. The confidence in his posture, the controlled intensity in his eyes, revealed a prince who understood that the tides had turned, and his generation now held the kingdom's fate in their hands. The contrast between the new order and the displaced queen could not have been more stark. Camilla, in private, was a storm contained, a predator biding her time. The golden light of the palace caught the edges of her silhouette as she reviewed old files, revisited political contacts, and mentally mapped out every influence she had quietly amassed over decades. She understood that power was not just in crowns, ceremonies, or public adoration. It was in secrets, in knowledge, and in the ability to strike when the opponent least expected. Her silence was a weapon sharper than any blade, a calculated tension that made even King Charles uneasy. Charles himself, for all his apparent resolve, was not blind to the dangerous calm emanating from his queen. Each time he passed her quarters, a fleeting glance reminded him that Camilla was still very much a force within the palace, an unpredictable variable who could ignite upheaval with a single calculated move. The confrontation in the private study had demonstrated his resolve, yet her quiet retaliation, her patient plotting, was a new threat entirely. A queen without a crown, but armed with the kind of influence that could topple empires, had begun weaving her web, a silent echo of the old power she had wielded for so long. The ceremonial day at Buckingham Palace marked the first public affirmation of this new power dynamic, but behind the glittering gowns and polished smiles lay a subtle tension that the public could not see. Catherine, radiant and commanding, walked beside William, projecting calm confidence, while the crown on her head gleamed not just with diamonds, but with the weight of expectation, responsibility, and history. Every cheer from the crowds, every flash of a camera solidified the perception of her rise, yet in the shadows, Camilla watched, calculating, waiting. Her presence, though unseen, was felt by all who knew the inner workings of the palace, a reminder that influence could outlast appearances, that silence could be more potent than any public confrontation. Charles, observing from a distance, was aware that his decisive stand had not ended the game. It had merely set the pieces in motion. The monarchy's future now balanced precariously between the visible authority of Catherine and William and the hidden, simmering threat of Camilla's cunning. The struggle was far from over. Each public engagement, each private conversation, each decision made in the corridors of power became a chess move, an intricate dance where one misstep could tip the balance entirely. Camilla's quiet plotting, Charles's firm resolve, and Catherine's poised rise together created a triangle of tension so potent that even the palace's ancient walls seemed to vibrate under its weight. What had begun as a symbolic gesture, a crown handed to Catherine, a bow in a private room, had evolved into a complex drama of power, pride, and survival. The monarchy, once stable and predictable, now moved to the rhythm of whispers, glances, and silent threats. No one could afford to underestimate the others, for in this game, every secret, every gesture, every carefully measured word could shift the balance of influence overnight. As the sun set over Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the courtyards, the stage was set. Catherine and William shone under the public eye, their authority formalized yet vulnerable to subtle sabotage. Charles, frail but unyielding, remained the linchpin, the one whose choices had triggered this dramatic reshaping. And Camilla, the once untouchable queen, lingered in the background, patient and calculating, preparing a counterstrike that could shake the monarchy to its very foundations. The quiet war of influence, ambition, and survival had only just begun, promising upheavals that would leave the world watching with bated breath. King Charles's sudden hardline stance against Camilla, was it a spontaneous burst of personal pride, or the precise, calculated maneuver of a monarch safeguarding the future for William and Catherine? Only time would reveal the depth of strategy behind that moment, the significance of that bow, and the true cost of challenging the tides of power in the House of Windsor. But one thing was clear. In the corridors of Buckingham Palace, the game was far from over, and every shadow, every silence, every glance was now a piece in a high-stakes battle for supremacy.